Hi, I'm Stephanie Hertz, Marketing Director here at Warwick Forest. Today I'm sitting in front of the Stratford Building, one of our apartment buildings for independent living here on campus. Today I have the pleasure of introducing Stephanie Durbin. Stephanie worked as a clinical dietitian at a Riverside long-term care facility for 6 years, and she currently is serving as the Patient Services Manager at Riverside Regional Medical Center. Additionally, she has been an adjunct professor teaching nutrition through the lifespan at Thomas Nelson Community College for over 10 years. Stephanie earned her bachelor's and master's degrees in human nutrition and foods from West Virginia University. She is board certified in gerontological nutrition, and she is published in 2 academic journals for her research in osteoporosis. We hope you enjoy her presentation today as she speaks on diet and nutrition for seniors.
Hi, I'm Stephanie. Thank you for coming to my nutrition lecture. I want to thank CNU2, the Lifelong Learning Society, for inviting me today. I'm going to be just discussing for the next hour or so nutrition for older adults. So let's get started. Okay, here we go. That's me. That's my presentation. So I'm going to wait for that to load just a second. I don't want to click too many times. There we go. To get things started, I have a little bit of a disclosure. So everything I say today is just my opinion. It's based off of scientific research, and I try to be as accurate as possible based off of the time frame that I had and the current research that was available to me. So everything I present today is just sheerly for educational purposes. And if you do receive medical advice from someone, I want you to know that I trust your doctor to give you sound advice, and I don't want this to be in place of something that you might have heard from your provider. So everything that I express today is not necessarily a representation of Riverside Health System or Christopher Newport University. It's me. So some of our objectives today, I really want you guys to get just a good overview of why nutritional needs are different for an older adult versus maybe a young adult or a middle-aged adult. And I want you to kind of learn some of the common nutritional issues that come across our paths when we start to get into our older ages. I hope that we'll be able to, after this, identify what foods are healthy, what foods are not so healthy, how to read a food label, how to look for healthy foods within our food groups, and maybe even apply some of these concepts to make some healthy changes in our lives. So first off, let's define who we're talking about. Depending on what research you're referencing, they define older adults as anywhere between 60 and above, 65 and above, 70 and above. And just for the sake of clarification, we're just going to focus on age 65 and above. And I will have a short focus on people that have made it to 80 and are 80 and older. The reason why we're talking about nutrition is that I think it's self-explanatory that good nutrition is good for us. But in reality, when someone has a good nutritional status, it can reduce their risk of developing chronic diseases such as heart disease, stroke, diabetes. And then if someone does develop it, it can reduce the burden of that illness. So their dependency on medication, their overall just general sense of well-being and feeling well, and then the debility that can sometimes come across whenever someone has a chronic illness. Good nutrition can increase years of life, but we're not just talking about years of life, we're talking about healthy years of life, because it's one thing to make the age 95, but you don't feel well and you don't have a good quality of life. And it's another thing to make it to 95 and you still have your independence and you feel good and it's their quality years. So we're going to focus on having a good nutritional status to try to make our last years of life healthy and happy ones. So what is good nutrition? So nutrition is referring to getting the nutrients your body needs to not only, survive, but to function optimally. And the nutrition we're talking about are nutrients and energy. So nutrients are going to be your carbohydrates, your fats, and your protein and water. We call those your macronutrients because we need those in large quantities. And we also count our nutrients as vitamins and minerals, and we call those micronutrients because although very important, the just sheer quantities we need are much smaller. We need those in milligrams and micrograms, whereas the fat, carbs, and protein, we need those in grams. So they're all very important. The name for them is just based off of how much, in quantity somebody needs. And when we talk about getting enough energy, that we're talking about calories, because your cells need energy to function and you need energy to maintain your weight. So it's important to get enough calories. Good nutrition is getting enough of these things, but not too much. It is this fine, it's not like an easy thing to define, but it's just this narrow window of I'm getting enough, but not too much, because optimal nutrition is over weeks, months, years. It's not just did I have a good day today, it's did I eat well overall on average over the past few weeks, months, years. And by eating well, it's I'm getting enough, but I'm not getting too much. If you don't get enough of a nutrient, then you're likely to start to not feel as well. You might start to show signs and symptoms of a deficiency, and your energy levels might be very low. And we increase our risk for chronic illnesses because we're not giving our body the nutrients it needs to keep our immune system functioning, keep our body and our cells functioning optimally. On the other hand, if we overnourish ourselves, if we get too many calories, if we get too many nutrients, first and foremost, we could, start to gain weight, but then we can also see that our body is storing all these extra nutrients and it's wasting energy on having to deal with extra nutrients within the bloodstream and in your metabolism. So optimal nutrition is getting enough, but not too much. But the thing about when we get older, there's a lot more things in our way that can affect getting good nutrition. We call those like barriers to good nutrition. We're more likely to see things that make it harder for us to get the nutrients that we need in the right amounts. One thing that we start to see as we get older is changes in taste and smell. Our ability to taste and smell does start to decline, and sometimes medications can cause that change as well. So as we get older, the last couple of tastes that we hold on to are sweet and salty. So a lot of the foods that we start to kind of gravitate towards are the foods that taste really good to us. And that, even when you're younger, sweet and salty taste good. If those are the only taste buds that are tasting, or tastes that are tasting vividly to you, it would make sense that you're attracted to those types of things even more so than when you were younger. And typically things that are very sweet and salty are not necessarily foods that are high in vitamins and minerals. As we get older, we're more likely to see dental problems. Maybe we lose some teeth, or the teeth that we do have aren't as strong and we can't chew as easily. And sometimes people even lose all their teeth and have dentures, and then we have to worry about whether or not those dentures fit well. And it can affect the types of foods we eat because we're not able to chew everything like we used to. As we get older, we also see a decrease in thirst sensation. And across the board, this happens pretty much to all of us. As we get older, we just don't feel thirst as readily as we did when we were younger. And thirst is one of the first things that we look for whenever we're trying to figure out if someone's hydrated. If someone's thirsty, it's likely they need to drink something. But if you're not feeling that thirst, you might not be compelled to maintain your hydration status and get enough fluids in your day. So we increase the risk for dehydration. As we get older, we see more gastrointestinal issues. People experience heartburn more commonly. Sometimes we even see like gastroparesis, where your stomach just kind of doesn't function as well. It's kind of immobilized, and so food doesn't digest as well. We see more problems with constipation and diarrhea. So all those things are going to affect the foods that you want to eat, because if you eat a food and it causes those symptoms, or it aggravates your stomach, or you have an ulcer, then you're not going to eat those foods anymore. And you're just going to narrow the amount of foods that you can eat even further. So all these things can be compounding sometimes. And as we narrow the amount of foods that are available to us, we're narrowing the variety of nutrients that we can eat. So as we narrow what we're eating, the likelihood of us getting enough nutrients declines. Some other things that happen as we age is that our mobility goes down, and our ability to perform those activities of daily living, those ADLs of going out, purchasing our food, storing our food, preparing food, cooking, being able to feed ourselves adequately, those abilities can start to decline as we get older. So as we lose some of those functions, that can increase our risk for malnutrition as well. Another thing that a lot of people don't talk about is just socialization. And especially during the pandemic right now, this is a big concern of mine. When you're with other people, it can stimulate your appetite. You might see this at Thanksgiving. Part of the reason that we do eat so much is that not only is the food good, but we're in good company most of the time. So you might see yourself eating more, or if you go out to dinner or have dinner with someone in their home, you might eat more than if you were just eating separately. I know personally, when I just cook one food for myself, if it's not for my whole family, I tend to eat differently. I tend to eat lighter. I'm not eating a full meal because I don't want to just cook for one person. It's a different concept to cook for one person than it is for multiples. So when someone's eating alone, whether or not they're in an independent living, assisted living, nursing home, or if they're, at their home, if they're eating alone most of the time, that is a risk factor for not getting enough nutrients. And then, like we talked about, the older we get, the more likely we are to experience things like heart disease, hypertension, stroke, diabetes, and those can affect what foods we can eat because we don't want to exacerbate those illnesses, but it also can affect how well we feel. And so when you don't feel well, you don't eat the same. And then if we have medications for those illnesses, sometimes the side effects of the medications can limit what we can eat, whether or not it's the medication doesn't recommend eating certain nutrients, so you limit those foods that have those nutrients, or if the medication causes a side effect like dry mouth or poor appetite or heartburn or gastrointestinal issues. And then on top of all that, there are certain nutrients that we just need more when we're older. So the barriers are kind of stacked against us and they can compound. So we need more nutrients, but we all have also all these things that can get in the way of us getting enough nutrients. So it's important to try to maximize the food we're eating to make sure we're getting enough of all those things that our body needs to function properly. Let's talk about some of those nutrients that we do need more of, or some of the nutrients that the recommendations for the amount we need, they change as we get older. Two nutrients that we need more of as we get older are calcium and vitamin D. The recommended dietary allowance, which is how we define how much of a nutrient you need to eat in a day. And this is based off of scientific research. It's like a 95% sure this is how much you need in a day kind of science. It backs it up pretty well. The RDA for nutrients like calcium and vitamin D goes up as we get older. For calcium, the RDA goes up just slightly from 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams per day, in part to kind of overcompensate for our decrease in absorption of calcium, but it's also to maintain your strong bones because we see that bone turnover does increase as we get older. We're just losing more calcium from our bones. So we want to make sure we're replenishing that through our diet. For vitamin D, it increases because we're making less, the synthesis goes down. So our organ functions do just they get tired. Our organs get tired as we get older, and your skin is the biggest organ you have. And as we get older, our ability to make vitamin D from sunshine through our skin and with our kidneys and our livers, that it's just not as efficient as it used to. So we have to make sure we're getting more from our diet because we're not making as much on our own. So the RDA does increase for vitamin D as well as calcium. A weird thing that we see with iron actually is that the recommended dietary allowance for iron kind of goes down for women, women only, and it's because after menopause we no longer have our periods, so we don't have as high a need for iron as when we were younger women. But the interesting thing about this is that even though the amount of iron that we need goes down, it's still a nutrient of concern because there's so many people that aren't getting enough and they're not absorbing it as well as when they were younger. And then with energy, it's important to make sure we're getting enough calories, but we see that the amount of calories we need just starts to go down as we get older. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail in a few slides, but as we get older, we're just not as active as we used to be. We start to lose lean muscle mass, and then we see our metabolic rate start to go down. So when your metabolism is lower, you're burning less calories throughout the day. So your need to eat calories is going to go down. We see about a 5% decrease in calorie recommendation for every decade after 55. For fiber, the recommendations are based off of calorie needs. So if calorie needs start to go down, then the fiber needs go down. For both men and women, the recommended amount of fiber per day goes down from like 38 to 30 grams for men and 25 to 21 grams for women. It's not a huge change, but it is a slight decline. And what's interesting about this is even with us needing less, kind of like the fiber or kind of like the iron, we still see people are still not on average getting enough fiber in their day. And then I'm sure you guys are very conscious of your protein intake. No matter what age, everybody seems to be focusing on protein nowadays. Our ability to absorb and metabolize protein does decline as we get older. And there's a lot of research that suggests that we need a little bit more protein as we get older to compensate for this reduced absorption and metabolism of it. So a lot of the research is pushing towards increasing the recommended amount of protein. And it's based off of how much you weigh, from like 0.8 grams per kilogram of your body weight to a full 1. But again, this is one of those numbers that it kind of depends on what research you're looking at. I always, when I was a clinical dietitian, I used that calculation for 1 gram per kilogram body weight when I had someone in their older years. So because we have all these barriers to good nutrition and because there's certain nutrients we need more of, on average, we do see some nutrients that across the board, many people aren't getting enough of, and those are our nutrients of concern. So like we talked about in those previous slides, fiber, vitamin C, or calcium, vitamin D, and protein are often nutrients that people aren't getting enough of at this age. We also see potassium, vitamin E, magnesium, B12, zinc. Part of it is from reduced absorption because we're just not as efficient at absorbing nutrients in our guts as we used to be. But part of it also is that we're not getting enough in our diet. So here's the big asterisk, the big whammy is that we have all these barriers to good nutrition. We have all these things that are like roadblocks and that could be presenting themselves in front of us to make sure that could prevent us or get in the way of getting enough nutrients. And we need less calories in a day. So if you need less calories in a day, you're going to have to decrease the amount of food you're eating, or you're going to gain weight because you're eating too many calories and your body's going to store that energy as fat. So, but we need to get all these nutrients in with less food. So our need for nutrients stays or goes up for pretty much for a lot of our nutrients besides like fiber and iron for women, but our amount of food that we're eating decreases. And oftentimes people's appetites decrease as well. As we get older, we just don't eat as much as we used to when we were younger. So we got to get those same nutrients in, but we got to get it in with less food. And that's where making smart choices is so important because we got to maximize our nutrient intake with less food. And so what I would want you to focus on would be a food that's very dense in nutrients. We call that nutrient dense food, a food that has a lot of nutrients, a lot of vitamins and minerals without having a large portion size. So we'll talk about foods that are nutrient dense, but if we focus on those foods, then we're more likely to get all those vitamins and minerals that we need in a day. Let's just say we don't get enough of those vitamins and minerals and we don't get enough calories. Over time, we're going to see weight loss because we're not able to maintain our weight. We're not eating enough energy, and we're going to deplete whatever stores of those nutrients we have. And then when we deplete our nutrient stores, we're depleting the nutrients available for all of our cells, including our immunity cells, and we increase the risk for illness and infection. So if you come across the common cold, or you have wounds, or if you have little nicks and cuts and things like that, or you're exposed to a virus or something else that's contagious, your body's ability to fight that off will not be as effective as if you were nourished properly. So not getting enough nutrition, not getting enough of those vitamins, minerals, fat, carbs, protein, water, and calories, we deplete whatever stores we had, and then now our body's vulnerable to things like infection and illness. Well, then when you're sick, you need more nutrients because your body's fighting off this illness. And so we're already not getting enough. We need more nutrients now, and now we're undernourished. And when you're undernourished and not getting enough, we run the risk of depleting even more nutrients and even more weight loss and even more illness and infection. And so we have this downward spiral that can happen when someone's malnourished. And this isn't age specific either. We see this in children, we see this in adults. Whenever someone's not nourished properly, their bodies just aren't functioning properly. So how do we maintain that good nutritional status to keep our bodies functioning properly? Well, the good news is that we have a blueprint, and it's pretty simple too. So simple is my go-to for many things. I try not to make things too complicated. There are a lot of resources and internet websites and friends that are selling nutritional things or do their own research, and it can be overwhelming. There's a lot of information out there, especially with the internet nowadays, but I try to keep things as simple as possible and not overwhelm myself, because some things are backed up by scientific research, and we know based off of what we know today, this is how we should eat, and they might change in 10, 20 years as more research comes out. But this is when I make recommendations for eating healthy, I go back to the tried and true and the simple, and that's the MyPlate, and that's through the USDA. I don't know if you guys remember, but I remember when I was younger, this has had a lot of different changes over the years. There was a pyramid at one point, and then they had different shapes and size and colors, and they used to define the food groups differently over the years. But most recently, the media source that they're using, or like the graphic, is called the MyPlate. It looks like a plate, and it has your 5 major food groups in it. And the recommendations are for healthy people, and they're adjusted. So as we get older and our calorie needs change, and our nutrient needs change, the amount of each food group that we need is going to change and be adjusted based off of how old we are, if we're male or female, how much activity we get, and how our height and weight, because a bigger body is going to need more calories and more nutrients to sustain itself than a smaller body. An older body is going to be less active, so the calorie needs are going to be different than a more active person. If you were to follow the guidelines for these food groups, your risk for malnourishment is very low, and you would be meeting the recommended amounts for your vitamins and minerals, carbs, fat, and protein, and water. So there's 5 major food groups. We have your fruits and vegetables. We have grains. They call it protein foods. They used to call it meats and beans, but it's your protein foods, foods that are high in protein. And then they have dairy. So let's kind of dig deep into these a little bit. So all of the recommendations for the amount of each food group are based off of calorie needs. So this is a little chart that kind of breaks down estimated amount of calories somebody would need. You can see on the left-hand side, we have men, and on the right-hand side, we have females. We have our age going down, and then we have different levels of activity going across. So when you see sedentary, that's somebody that sits most of the day, whether or not they're at home or at work or in a car, but they're sitting most of the day. They might get up and do small activities, but those activities aren't strenuous. Their heart rate isn't very high. They're not, breathing hard. It's not like exercise. So sedentary is sitting most of the day, not a lot of movement on our feet. And when we are on our feet, it's not hard work. A moderate amount of activity is going to be somebody that stands most of the day, and they do sit, but for most of their waking hours, they're on their feet. It's not a lot of strenuous activity, maybe a few moments where they are a little bit winded because they were moving a little fast or lifting something. But that could be someone that's on their feet all day doing housework or yard work, or maybe their work requires them to be walking most of the day or moving. But that moderate amount of activity is somebody that's on their feet most of the day and then gets a little bit of extra exercise in. Someone that's considered active, and this is somebody that is on their feet most of the day, but they have some exercise in their day. So most days a week, they're getting exercise that increase their heart rate and their breathing rate, and it's like exercise. They're working at it, they're sweating. So most people, regardless of age in America, they're going to be in the sedentary to moderate. I'm in the moderate. And that's me. I'm in the moderate. On a good week, I might be active, but that's me. I'm in the moderate category. I spend most of my day on my feet, and I get a little bit of activity at work where I'm getting a workout, but it's not like an exercise that's strenuous and I'm sweating. So let's kind of just break down a couple scenarios here. Let's say we have a male. He's in the sedentary lifestyle category, and he's age 60. somewhere between 66 and 70. That average person in that category would probably need about 2,000 calories a day to maintain weight. So we wouldn't see weight loss, we wouldn't see weight gain if on average he ate about 2,000 calories a day. And this is over time. So maybe Thursday he had 1,800 calories, Friday he had 2,400 calories, Saturday he had 22, Sunday he had 18. It's all about average. It's over time. If we had a female that was in the moderate category and she was like 78, she might need about 1,800 calories a day. Our food group recommendations are based off of how many calories somebody needs in a day. So let's take that 1,800 calories a day person, that the second category here. They would need about 2.5 cups of vegetables, 1.5 cups of fruit, 6 servings of grains. We call a serving of grain an ounce, and we'll kind of go into that a little bit more in a minute. 3 cups of dairy a day, 5 ounces of protein foods in a day. And then we have this little category at the end called empty calories. This category in the food groups is what's left over. So if you were to follow the guidelines and eat all those fruits, all those vegetables, all those, grains, dairy, and protein foods, you'd have a little bit of wiggle room left over at the end for like a glass of wine and a cookie, or adding some extra whipped cream, or having dessert, or your favorite salty chippy snack or whatever. You'd have some room for those comfort foods that aren't very healthy for us. So there's some calories left over. An empty calorie an empty calorie food is a food that provides calories. It has, carbs, fat, protein in it, but it doesn't have a lot of vitamins and minerals. So, off the top of your head, a junk food is probably empty calorie food. It's, it's very satisfying in its own ways. It's probably salty and sweet, but it's not nourishing ourselves very well. There's not a lot of vitamins and minerals in it. It's not nutrient dense. It's the exact opposite of nutrient dense. So there's room for all those fun stuff in your day and still get your vitamins and your minerals to your food group. All right, so in our age group that we're talking about, 65 and above, the average person needs between 2 and 3 cups of vegetables. When I say vegetable, I'm talking about carrots, broccoli, green peppers. I'm not going to get in the debate of whether or not a tomato is a fruit or a vegetable, but typically, a vegetable is not sweet. It's going to be something that you usually cook. You can eat raw, but a cup equals a cup. So if I had celery sticks and I cut it up and I kind of cut them up and put them in a measuring cup, a cup is a cup. If I had, grape tomatoes, if I kind of just jammed a bunch in a measuring cup, that cup is a cup. If I was just kind of estimating and I had like a carrot, like a whole carrot, not a baby carrot, if it was medium to large, if I had a whole tomato, a medium to large one would be considered a cup. If I was eating some leafy greens that aren't cooked, so any sort of salad greens, if I'm not cooking them down, I actually kind of have to double it up. It'd have to be 2 cups of that salad versus one cup of cooked, because I don't know if you've ever cooked, greens or spinach, it wilts and then it like loses like half of its volume. So if you were eating it raw, a measuring for 1 cup would be considered 2 cups. And then if someone wanted vegetable juice, like tomato juice, a cup equals a cup as well. Their recommendations are to get a variety, eat with a rainbow. So don't always eat carrots, don't always eat celery, mix it up, get different vegetables, especially, there's a lot of vegetables that change with the season as well, but nowadays you can get any vegetable just about any time in the season at the grocery store. So if you get a variety of vegetables and you're not just eating the same ones day in, day out, you're more likely to get a variety of nutrients, because, carrots are super high in vitamin D, or vitamin A, please excuse me, they're not high in vitamin D. Carrots are super high in vitamin A, but they're not high in other vitamins. So if you had a different vegetable that was high in other vitamins, then you're kind of balance that out. Also note is that we have some things that are barriers to good nutrition. So if someone's not able to go to the grocery store, maybe they're having someone prepare foods for them. So that's going to be different. It's going to be based off of their cooking abilities. Maybe someone has trouble chewing. Maybe they can't chew a raw vegetable. So we have to choose vegetables that we can cook, and we have to cook it until they're soft enough. Maybe we have issues with cutting vegetables or preparing or cooking or storing. Maybe we don't have a whole refrigerator at our beck and call. So the recommendations are individually optimized. So you just eat based off of where you are. So if you can't handle a raw carrot, don't eat a raw carrot. If you hate cooked carrots, then just don't eat cooked carrots. It's okay if you don't like it, you don't have to eat it. For fruits, the average person in this age group needs about 1.5 to 2 cups per day. And a serving for a fruit is kind of big, like one small whole piece of fruit, whether or not it's like a small apple, a pear, a banana, one small equals a whole cup. So you don't have to like eat that much fruit. You could have like 1.5 pieces of fruit a day. Or if I had grapes, I'd be putting them in a, you could kind of estimate. Half a cup is about the size of a female fist, but you could estimate based off of how many you're eating as to whether or not you're getting enough fruit. If we're doing fruit juice, it's 4 ounces as a serving, so it's a half a cup. I personally am not a huge fan of juice, and I'll tell you why. Part of it is that it's missing a lot of the nutrients that whole fruit had if you're eating it whole, but also it doesn't have any fiber in it, and so it's not filling. It does have some antioxidants in it, and it does have some vitamin C. And if you read it, most of your fruit juices are pasteurized, so it kills off some of the vitamins with the heat, so they add it back in. So even if you bought 100% apple juice, you'll see ingredients: apple juice and ascorbic acid, which is vitamin C. They added it back in. So I'm not a huge fan of juice as a way to get your fruit intake in through the food groups. But if it helps you to satisfy your thirst and is keeping you hydrated, go for it. I like it. And then if you're choosing dried fruit like raisins or craisins or prunes, half a cup is considered a full cup serving. So fresh, frozen, a whole fruit or sliced fruit, that all counts, even canned. So canned peaches and things like that. If you're choosing juice, choose 100% juice. If you're choosing canned, look for canned in its own juice or in light syrup, because otherwise we're adding some extra sugars that we didn't need. I would not say the fruit in a pie count. They're delicious and I'm still going to eat it, but I'm not going to say that it counts towards my food group for fruit. And this is the tricky thing about the food groups, is that like if you really wanted to get kind of like, I don't know, if you wanted to get creative with it, you can argue your way into just about any food and say, well, there's eggs and flour in my cake, so it's protein foods and it's grains. But if you have to really stretch it to fit into a food group, it probably doesn't count towards that food group. Speaking of grains, the average person at this age group needs about 5 to 7 servings of grains a day. And they call that an ounce, because this is a little tricky here, because grains could be in the form of oatmeal. They could be in the form of rice or pasta, bread, muffins, things like that. So when they say 1 ounce, they're meaning 1 serving, and that's a cup of cereal, whether or not it's like Cheerios or hot cereal, half a cup of pasta or rice, or 1 slice of bread, not like a huge like Panera slice of bread, but 1 slice of like sandwich bread you would get at the grocery store. It's considered 1 serving. And the recommendation is to try to get at least half of those servings to be whole grains. So what is a whole grain? A whole grain is one that's less processed. It has more fiber. We're not milling out the fiber to give it a softer, more fluffier texture like white bread. A whole grain is, they leave it intact, and they don't take out that outer bran layer. So we're leaving the fiber in there, so it's more healthy because it has the fiber. So the recommendations are to try to get half of our grains to be whole grain, and look for 100% whole grain, because they can trick you a little bit and just put like wheat bread, and it's all wheat, but it's not necessarily whole wheat. So you got to read the label. Is it 100% wheat bread? And turn it around and look for some fiber. But not everything has to be whole grain. So I grew up in an Italian household. We made our own pasta. I don't particularly like whole grain pasta, and that's okay. You don't have to have whole grain pasta if you don't like whole grain pasta, but I love whole grain bread. And so when I'm choosing my grains, I try to like balance it out of like my white grains versus my whole grains. And I even balance that out over days. There might be a whole day where I don't have a single whole grain, but the next day I'm like, oh my goodness, I need to make smarter choices and get my fiber in. So it doesn't always have to be the same day. It can be over time. For dairy, we all need 3 cups. This starts at like age 3. We need 3 cups of dairy a day. This could be a dairy replacer. So the likelihood of having lactose intolerance does increase as we get older. If you are a milk drinker and you just continue to drink milk, you're probably not going to develop it because your body's just going to maintain that enzyme to break it down. But if you have trouble with dairy foods because of lactose in it, then you could choose a dairy replacer. There's lots of different options nowadays. There's oat milk, rice milk, oh goodness, soy milk, almond milk, cashew milk. I like soy milk myself. I think I like the flavor the best, but to each his own. So if you can't handle actual milk, like from a cow, you have some options. The recommendations are to choose the low-fat versions because we'll get into in a minute, the type of fat in milk and dairy products or anything coming from an animal is not good for our hearts. So the recommendations are to choose the lower fat options, whether or not it's yogurt, milk to drink, and cheese. There's not a lot of options for low-fat cheese. There are some, but there's not as many. So we got to watch our portions of it. A cup equals a cup if we're drinking it. It equals a cup of yogurt. It gets a little frisky when we talk about cheese. A third of a cup of shredded cheese equals 1 cup serving. And if we're doing block cheese, like if you're a big fan of charcuterie boards, like I am, 1.5 ounces are considered like a serving of like the cheese that you would like slice or cube up. There's a lot of media around dairy and whether or not it's healthy for you. I keep it simple. The research still recommends it, and it's really hard to get enough calcium without dairy. It's hard to get enough vitamin D without it as well. So if you are someone that's choosing to omit it, I would recommend a calcium and vitamin D supplement to make sure you're getting enough calcium and vitamin D, because although those nutrients are found in other things, it's really hard to get enough. Like a serving of milk has like triple the amount of calcium than a serving of broccoli. So you'd have to have 10 cups of broccoli a day to get enough calcium. It's a lot. I wouldn't recommend 10 cups of broccoli in a day. For protein foods, the serving size is actually really small, and the amount that we need is pretty small. We need about 5 to 6 ounces per day. An ounce is the size of like a finger. If we're talking about a serving is considered 3 ounces is the size of a deck of cards. In America, our portion sizes of meat are pretty large, but I do usually see as we get older, our portion sizes of meat do go down to a more appropriate level. The issue with protein foods is that they're more expensive, they're harder to chew, and they require most of the time some sort of cooking, processing kind of thing. So there's a lot of people when they get into their older years that aren't getting enough protein foods because of the work that goes into preparing it, but also if they're on a budget, it could be too expensive. It'd be hard to fit it into their budget sometimes, and it's not as easy to work with as some of the other food groups. An ounce equals an ounce. Like I talked about, 1 ounce is like the size of your finger. So if it's an ounce of meat, it could be a 1/4 cup of beans. 1 egg is considered a 1 ounce serving. A tablespoon of peanut butter, cashew butter, almond butter, they call those nut butters, is the equivalent of a 1 ounce portion. And then if you like to eat nuts like cashews, almonds, things like that, 1/2 ounce of nuts is considered a 1 ounce portion of protein foods. So we talked about all of our food groups. And we talked about some of the barriers that can get in our way of getting enough of those food groups and the importance of trying to get enough. And we talked about having some extra wiggle room at the end. If we eat all of these, if we follow these guidelines to a T, you still have some extra calories left over at the end of the day to eat your favorite foods that don't necessarily fit into these food groups. If someone asks me, is this healthy? My general quick answer is always, does it fit into a food group easily? And if it does, you're like, oh yeah, this is a carrot. It fits into my food group easily. Then it's straightforward. You kind of get an idea. Now, if someone put a ton of butter and sugar, like they're the brown butter, brown sugar glazed carrots, it's a little, that's a little bit not as straightforward. The preparation is important as well, but you're still going to get those nutrients from those carrots. I just had a question about eggs, and I think that's a great question because the recommendations for eggs have changed over the years. The American Heart Association used to crack down on eggs, pun intended, because of the yolk. The yolk has a lot of cholesterol inside of it. But what's fun now is that research has changed. We've learned more about fats and cholesterol and how they affect our health. And what we find is that actually the cholesterol isn't as bad for our heart as we thought. It's the saturated fat. So if we are trying to choose healthy foods for our heart, we got to watch out for saturated fat. And we'll talk about that in a minute. We don't necessarily have to worry about the cholesterol in the eggs. So the recommendations used to always be like, take the yolk out, just get the protein with the egg white. But now the recommendation is to leave the yolk in because of all the vitamins and minerals in it. Otherwise, it's not very nutrient dense. It's just protein. There's not a lot of vitamins and minerals in the white part of the egg. So if you're going to eat the egg, eat the whole egg. I'm a huge fan of eggs. And number one, because they're cheap. Number two, they're soft. Number three, they're easy to prepare. So if this is an option that someone likes, this could be a great option for someone to make sure they're getting enough protein in their day. It's really about balance for them. If somebody is a meat eater, like really just enjoys their meat and has no issue with budget, no issue with chewing, digests just fine, they don't necessarily need to incorporate eggs in their day. But if it is a healthy option. I like it because unlike other meats, it tends to be a little bit more nutrient dense. I hope that answers your question. As to how many to have in a week, I don't know that answer. They used to try to recommend only 2 per week because of the cholesterol in it, but now I don't know what the newest recommendations are. So I'm sorry, I don't know that one.
Then someone said, is red meat healthy?
Is red meat healthy? Oh, that's good. I didn't touch on that. So red meats. So when we say red meats, we're talking about like beef. The type of fat in beef and the amount of fat in beef tends to be higher than in other types of protein foods. So we got your poultry, we got seafood and fish. We have red meats like beef. And then I'm not sure if pork fits into the red meat category because it's like the other white meat. But pork and beef tend to have more saturated fat, the type of fat that's bad for your heart. And the same thing goes for like dark meat chicken and dark meat turkey. So your legs and thighs, they tend to have more saturated fat than the white meat. They can fit into any healthy plan, but if the majority of your foods, protein foods, are coming from red meat, then your intake of saturated fat might be above the recommended amount. It kind of depends on what your portion size is and how much you're eating it, or how often you're eating it. So let's talk about that saturated fat. So there's different types of fat. And in the past, we used to worry about just total fat intake. You want a low fat diet, don't eat that much fat, choose like low fat this, low fat that. And it's not necessarily total fat, it's the type of fat. Anything that's coming from an animal source tends to be high in saturated fat. And saturated fat is the type of fat that increases your risk for heart disease. It increases your risk for high blood pressure. It increases your risk for, oh, I like where this guy's going. He's asking about wine. I'll get there in a second. It increases your risk for heart disease, increases your risk for high blood pressure, increases your risk for your cholesterol to be high and plaque buildup in your arteries, and increase your risk for like a heart attack or stroke. So when people eat too much saturated fat over and over again, they just are over the years may run the risk of developing heart disease. That my question was about wine. Is wine healthy? So alcohol isn't a nutrient that your body requires. It's not an essential nutrient. We don't have to have it to survive. I think some people might debate me on that one, but technically we don't have to have it. Alcohol in moderation is considered healthy. There's some research that's saying we shouldn't have it at all. There's some other research that says, well, if you have it in moderation, it could be healthy. When I say moderation, I mean 1 drink a day for females, 2 drinks a day for men, and we don't save that for Friday night. So it's just because on average you have 1 a day doesn't mean you can have 5 on Friday because you didn't have any Monday through Thursday. It's more just on average, only 1 a day or 2 a day for men. Wine is a healthier option than some of your other alcoholic beverages because specifically I'm talking about red wine because of the antioxidants found in the red wine. That's what actually my research in grad school was related to, one of the antioxidants, resveratrol, that's found in red wine. If we drink alcohol above that moderate amount, any health benefit that could be seen from getting those antioxidants is negated. It's not going to work because the alcohol itself, when drinking in large amounts, increases our likelihood of weight gain because it's an empty calorie. There's no nutrients in that, but it also increases it can counteract any of those health benefits of the antioxidant. The antioxidant and anti-inflammatory compounds found in your wines can reduce your risk for heart disease and can reduce your risk for some of those chronic illnesses and overall low-grade inflammation. But when drank in excess, it does the exact opposite. And it can be, it can alter what foods you're eating because you might choose differently when you've had several drinks of wine or beer or, mixed drinks than if you were to be drinking water or a different beverage. So in moderation, alcohol can be healthy, but anything above that, it kind of not so much. So alcohol is considered one of those nutrients that doesn't nourish. Added sugars, so not necessarily a natural sugar found in your grapes or in your vegetables, but added sugar. So sugar they added when they processed the food. So it could be sugar added to your yogurt. It could be sugar added to, a dessert or sweetened beverage, a soda, things like that. There's a lot of research that shows that when we have too much added sugar in our day, our likelihood of being healthy is lower. So it increases our likelihood of developing those chronic illnesses over time because we ate too much of it. Part of it is related to the weight gain. But even if someone were to have maintain their weight and not be overweight and have too much sugar in their diet, it's not going to cause diabetes per se, as there's no direct correlation between the sugar and diabetes. It's the lack of nutrients from those foods that are high in sugar, and then the metabolic strain on your body for having to process all this extra sugar that our metabolism just wasn't made to process. So when people eat too much saturated fat, too much alcohol, too much sugar, and too much salt. So I have an asterisk next to salt because it's an essential nutrient. You have to have sodium in your day. It's an electrolyte. Your body cells need it to maintain homeostasis within the bloodstream. However, most of us get too much salt. So having too much sodium and all these other things, saturated fat, added sugar, alcohol, increases our likelihood of developing a chronic illness such as heart disease, diabetes, stroke, and even certain types of cancer. So if you were to follow those MyPlate guidelines and get those foods that are a food group, your likelihood of developing these chronic illnesses are less, because not only are you getting your vitamins and minerals and the amount of calories you need, you're also not getting as much of those saturated fat, added sugars, sodium, and alcohol that are coming from those junk foods that I don't want to call them junk foods, just the foods that don't fit well into a food group. So let's talk about when we actually have a food label in front of us, because an apple doesn't have a food label. Let's talk about if we buy prepared food or buy a processed food, how to tell if it's healthy. So this is an example of a food label. It is not specific to anything. It's from the FDA website. I took it with their permission, so don't try to guess if this is like a yogurt or cracker or something. But this is a food group or a food label. If I were to turn over a food and try to figure out if it's healthy, the first thing I would look at my label is the serving size. If it's a really small serving size, I have to be careful about that because I'm probably going to eat more than what that suggestion is. And then all those numbers I'm going to have to multiply. So if I eat double the portion, I'm probably have to double all those numbers on there. So the first place I always look for when I look at a nutrition facts label is what the serving size is. Because all the information on here is referring to that specific portion size. And I'm very conscious of portion sizes being different across manufacturers. So let's just say we bought Triscuits and then we bought Wheat Thins. The serving size of those crackers are going to be different. So I can't just assume that because I typically eat, Triscuits, that if I were to buy a different brand or different type of cracker, that the serving size is going to be the same. And that's the same thing for just about anything, whether or not we're talking about like a protein bar or chips or a drink or something. The serving size isn't always what we think it's going to be, and it's not going to be the same across different brands or manufacturers. So step one, we look at the portion size. Step two, I go straight to the percent daily value. And this is going to freak people out because everybody goes straight to the calories. That's like an afterthought for me. If I'm trying to figure out if food is healthy, granted, calories are very important because if you eat too many calories, you're going to gain weight. If you don't eat enough calories, you're going to lose weight. But if I'm trying to figure out if a food's healthy, the calories aren't necessarily the thing that's going to tell you it's healthy. It's the nutrients in it. So First place I go is the serving size. The second place I'm gonna go is the percent daily value. That's gonna tell you the amount of nutrients in that food. I don't look at the grams, and people probably think I'm crazy. I don't look at the grams because someone's gonna say, this is 8 grams of fat. Is that a lot? I'm like, I don't know. How much do you need in a day? That's where the percent daily value comes in. So that's the portion of the total amount that's recommended in a day. So for here, like total fat, it says 10%. This food's not made up of 10% fat. If I were to eat 2/3 a cup of this food, then I would get 10% of the total fat that I need in a whole day. So I always use the percent daily value. I don't go off the grams because otherwise I'd have to have all these dietary, the recommended dietary intakes, those RDAs, I'd have to have all those memorized to figure out if I'm getting enough. So I go off the percent daily value. It is an estimation. It's estimated for like a general 2,000 calorie diet. So it's not individualized to you specifically if you need this amount of that nutrient, but it's at least a good guideline of this is how much is in that food. So let's talk about those percent daily values and what those numbers mean, because this has 10% of my daily total fat. Is that a lot? Is that not a lot? How do we define that criteria? So if I were looking at the percent daily values, we actually have little indices. We have different categories for each one. If a food has 5% or less of the daily value, it's considered low or a poor source. So this food has 5% of saturated fat. It's low in saturated fat. That's a good thing. We want this food to be low in saturated fat. That means the type of fat is more of those healthy fats in there. It has 0% of my daily recommended limit for cholesterol. So anything that's 5% or low or below, it's considered low. Or if we're talking about like a vitamin, it could be considered a poor source. So if it's 5% or less of a vitamin, you say it's a poor source. It's not a good source of that. Doesn't have a lot in there. If it has 10 to 19% of the daily value, it's considered a good source. There's a good amount in there. So this total fat, there's 10%. There's a good amount of fat in this food. For fiber, there's 14%. There's a good amount of fiber in here. For vitamin D, there's 10%. There's a good amount of vitamin D in here. If it's 20% or above, it's considered high in that nutrient or a great source. So this has 20% of the recommended limit for added sugar. So this is high in added sugar. It also has 20% of my daily needs for calcium. It's a great source of calcium. They could put that on the front of the label. This is like the FDA definition. So if you ever see that, like great source of calcium, low in fat, you know, a good source of, I don't know, iron, if it meets those criteria per serving, then they can label it on the front as like a, I don't know, like a merchandising thing. If it's between 6 and 9%, there's no FDA definition. My personal definition is that I call it eh. So if someone's like, is this high in sodium? I'm like 7%. Well, it's not low. It's not high. It's eh. So that's not an industry term. That's not something you're going to find in a textbook. That's my own personal thing, and it's not representing CNU or Riverside. But it's eh. So this food that we're looking at right here, it's got 10% of my total fat, 5% of my saturated fat, 0% of my total recommended limit for cholesterol. And that's how I would look to see if a food is healthy. I'm looking at all those nutrients. For calories, they have different definitions for calories as well. So if it's 40 calories or less, they can call this food a low calorie food. And there's not a lot of foods that are 40 calorie or less. Even a piece of fruit is probably going to be at least 60. This might be like a rice wafer or something that has a lot of air in it, and the portion size is small. But if it's 40 calories or less, they can define it. You can say this is low in calories. Most foods are going to be like a moderate amount. Most foods are around 100. So anywhere 100-ish, we would call that a moderate amount of calories. A long time ago, they had those 100-calorie packs, like 100-calorie packs for Oreos and Chips Ahoy and things. I think that's where they got that from. And then if a food has 400 calories or more, it's considered high in calories. This is probably more going to be towards a meal or a part of a meal. Kcal means calorie. It's a killer calorie. So I'm sorry, I should have just said calorie. But if you're finding a snack food that's not a lot of food and it's 400 calories, it's probably a lot of calories for a small amount of food. This food has 230, so it's kind of, I'm going to use that word again. It's not high in calories, and it's a little bit more than moderate. It's ish. It's not low in calories either. So that's why I don't love looking at the calories when I'm looking to see if something's healthy, because I could have a healthy food that's kind of in that and I'm not going to worry about that calorie because I know I'm getting my nutrients, and that's the whole point of eating. So let's practice, huh? If I want to know if a food's healthy, I'm looking at those percent daily values, and I'm looking at those things that we know are not healthy, the saturated fat, the sodium, and the added sugars. And I'm looking at the foods the nutrients that I know are healthy. I'm looking at the fiber, looking at the vitamins, and I'm looking at the minerals. This is like a dietitian insider trick. Anytime I read my food label, I'm going grocery shopping after this, I turn it over, and that's where I focus. That's what I look at. I try not to get distracted by all the shiny pictures on the front that are telling me that my kid's going to love it. I just read the nutrition facts and make a decision for myself. So this guy right here, let's look at all these nutrients I put in. The things in red are things that I'm kind of looking out for. I don't want too much of those. If things are green, I want them to be high. I want them to have a good amount in there. So saturated fat, I got 5% of the daily limit, recommended limit. This is low. 5% or low is considered low. So it's low in saturated fat. They might have made a conscious decision when they were developing the product of picking what the serving size was and what the recipe was to try to keep that 5% or less. It happens sometimes. Manufacturers can get a little tricky because they want that label to represent them in a certain way. For sodium, this has 7% of the daily recommended amount of sodium. So it's in the category. It's not 5% or less, and it's not above 10 or above. For added sugars, see how it says like 10 grams of added sugars? I don't look at that because it doesn't tell me. I need to know the total recommended amount, which is about 200 grams a day. I think, did I just make that up? I totally just made that up. That math was not good. Ignore that. Delete it from the record. 10 grams of sugar is going to be 20% of the daily recommended limit. And so this is considered high in added sugar. I'm not looking at the total sugars because some of those sugars are naturally found in there. I don't know what this product is made up, but it could have been like a dairy product that has natural lactose in it. It's considered a sugar, so it's going to be on the label. I'm looking at the stuff they added themselves to make it taste yummy. So this is low in saturated fat, low in sodium, but it's high in added sugars. And that's okay. I just have to watch the added sugars for the rest of the day. So this is getting me, 1/5 of my total limit for added sugars. So I'd have to be conscious of the other foods I'm choosing for the day, but it could fit into a healthy day. For vitamins and minerals and for fiber, this has 14% of my daily value for fiber. So this has a good amount of fiber. It's between 10 and 19. That's a good amount. I mean, it's not high, but it's a good amount. In reality, I like foods that have a good amount of fiber because it's not too much. Sometimes when you get into a really high fiber food, you might see the effects of what that fiber does. I don't know if I need to go into that right now. It's probably assumed. But if it's a good amount, then you're going towards the total amount of fiber you need in a day without like having like a fiber bomb. And then for the vitamins and minerals, this one has a good amount of vitamins and minerals. The vitamin D is 10%. That's a good amount. The calcium is 20%. It's high in calcium. The iron's 45%. That's a lot of iron. That's 45%. That's almost half of your total daily need for iron. And see how this isn't specific to any age group, because like we talked about with the females after menopause, their need for iron goes down. So this actually, I mean, it's a good reference point, but it's a good amount of iron for a female after 65. And then for potassium, it's only about 6% of the daily needs for potassium. So, I mean, it's high in some vitamins, not all of them. And they don't have to put all the vitamins and minerals on here. That could be tricky because the 4 vitamins and minerals they put on here and sodium, they're on there because the vitamin D and the calcium, the iron and potassium are common things that we're not getting enough of in America. So there could be other vitamins and minerals in there that are just not listing. Sometimes when a food's trying to advertise that it's healthy, they'll list them all. Like you can turn over your Cheerios and you're gonna be like, boom, look at all these vitamins and minerals. You can turn over a different cereal and they don't even have them listed. So that could be a little tricky for you to try to determine which one's healthier because they don't have to list all the vitamins and minerals. That's up to the manufacturer if they want to try to advertise that this is high in vitamins and minerals. So it's as much as it's straightforward, there are some hiccups that can sometimes make it not so straightforward. So overall, if I was kind of evaluating this, I'd give this food like a B+, almost an A. I'd say it's relatively healthy. It's got some good amount of fiber. It's got some vitamins and minerals. It's not high in saturated fat or sodium. It just has a little bit too much sugar, but that's okay. This is not too bad. It's not a bad food. Sometimes foods are really just self-explanatory. You turn it over and just the numbers are through the roof, and it makes it easier to make the decision. So let's talk about when you don't have a food label. Let's talk about when we go out to eat, or we're getting food that's prepared that we didn't prepare it. Some restaurants, if they're a large chain restaurant, they will have their nutrition information on their websites, which is awesome. Sometimes if you would like to use the internet and you like to you use a Google search or something, you might find nutrition information for a food and it's not necessarily accurate. There's a lot of websites that put nutrition information. I get a little weary about it unless I directly see it from like that restaurant's website. I don't always trust it. There's some there are some, I don't want to say website names out loud. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to, but there are some websites that aren't affiliated with the restaurant. And you don't know, there's no verification of it. I'd rather just, if it's not listed on the restaurant's website, then I just kind of fluff over it. I ignore it. Overall, if we're going to a restaurant, those foods tend to be less healthy. They tend to have less vitamins and minerals, and part of it is just the foods that are offered. But they also tend to have more salt, more fat, and more sugar. And the portion sizes tend to be higher than what you typically would prepare for yourself at home. And those portion sizes can make it so your whole meal has more fat, more salt, more sugar, more calories than you need in a whole day. So there's some tricks that we can do to try to help make healthier choices when we eat out. And if you have that nutrition information on the website before you go out, it can help you make a healthier choice. But there's some other just little tricks you can do without even looking at the nutrition information. So some of my tips, one of the things I always recommend is to ask for substitutions. If a sandwich automatically comes with fries, then I try to, I see that question, I'll get to in a second. If a sandwich automatically asks for fries, then I will try to see if there's other options. Maybe there's a side salad or fruit or another vegetable I can order. I try to balance it out. If I want a burger, I'm going to eat a burger. You know, I'm a dietitian, but I would still eat a burger, but I'm probably not going to do a burger and fries. I'm going to do a burger and a vegetable side or a fruit side or a side salad. So I try not to make too unhealthy choices within the meal. I try to choose, if I'm choosing an unhealthy entree, I try to choose a healthier side. If you're looking at the entrees and they have a lot of fried things, but they also see maybe they have grilled or baked, you can choose the grilled or baked most of the time. Those fried foods, try to make that part of like a treat, because the fried foods are going to have more fat in them, and depending on what they're frying it in, it could be more saturated fat. And the grilled and baked, you're just going to maintain that nutrient content in it without adding those extra calories. And I've gone to restaurants that didn't necessarily have the other options listed on the menu. So they might have like a grilled chicken, but they don't say it on the menu. You just have to ask. I very rarely, now with the pandemic, eating out, it's just been a completely different experience. But before, we're just say pre-pandemic, I very rarely would order anything but water in a restaurant. And part of that is because I'm cheap, and it's just really expensive to get this giant soda that I'm only going to drink half of, and it's like almost $3. And then like if I do get a glass of wine, I can almost get like a whole bottle for that price of one glass of wine. So part of it is my budget, but it's about the calories. There's going to be a lot of, if you get anything but water in a restaurant, or unless you get like black coffee or unsweetened tea, it's going to have a ton of added sugar in it, or alcohol. So if we're trying to just make healthier choices when we go out, then choose that water. If you very, very, very rarely go out and it's a treat and you're getting wine, I get it. But if you're one to go out a couple times a week, then, you know, those little changes can make a difference. If the restaurant is a place that has combos or has like recommended entrees with sides, sometimes I'll order a la carte. I'll order individual things. Like that helps with my budget too. But it also is, just say you go to a fast food restaurant and they have a combination meal of a sandwich, fries, and a drink. That drink, they're going to charge you the same if you ask for water or soda. And the fries are going to be like a medium fry instead of a small fry. So I oftentimes will just get my sandwich and a small fry on the side if I'm really just going for it and I wanted the fries with that sandwich. So you could order piece by piece instead of getting the recommended combo, and won't necessarily cost you any more if you don't need that beverage that comes with the combo. If we're doing like Chinese food, like you don't necessarily need to get the combo of like the specialty chicken with fried rice and an egg roll. You could choose like the entree that comes with white rice so that you could be saving those extra fat from the fried egg roll and the fried rice. The portions, like we talked about before, the portion sizes at a restaurant, because in America, we want to get like the most for our money. Most restaurants have a large portion size, so you feel like, it's worth your time and your money. Split that entree with somebody else or take some home. That can be a really helpful strategy to kind of stretch that food out. So now you have a second meal, but also to save the amount that you're eating and save some of those extra fat, sugar, salt, and calories. I went out, I took my really good friend for dinner on Monday, and it was like a treat because I don't go out very often anymore. And we got Italian and it was really good. But the meal was huge. It was, I swear my plate was ginormous. It was huge. My friend ordered her dressing on the side and I did not. And I really wish I had, because it was like swimming in dressing, and it was delicious house-made Italian dressing, but it was just too much. If you were to order a dressing or condiment on the side, it puts you in control of how much you're eating and how much you're putting on your food. So I would recommend to order it on the side, and you could dip it or spread it over as you want so you can control how much you got. The dipping part is like an old Weight Watchers trick. You get a little bit of dressing in every bite without using as much dressing. I also took a lot of food home. I had a pasta dish, and I ordered a pasta dish that had vegetables mixed in with it too. And I ate all the vegetables that were in this giant pasta dish. And then I only ate about a quarter of that pasta, and I brought the rest home, and I fed my husband, myself, and my kid. And then I made a side of veggie, and we ended up spreading that meal across, like, I still have one serving in there. So I got like five meals out of that one little pasta, not little, giant pasta meal. And it made me feel better about the price I was paying for this, fancy Italian meal. But that was something I consciously did. I made sure I ate the vegetables out of it, and I knew I could add vegetables at home. And I just basically took like the plain pasta home, and we ended up mixing it. I didn't choose the creamy sauce, because anytime you see cream, think saturated fat. I chose like a white wine, like really a light sauce, and I took a bunch home with me. So that's another strategy to try to choose healthier things when we go out. Most restaurants, especially nowadays, they want to accommodate you. They want to have good customer service. So if you ask for exclusions, most of the time they'll honor it. And I've been really weird in restaurants before. We went to a seafood restaurant and I asked for broccoli without salt, because the last time I went there, the broccoli just tasted really salty to me. So I just asked for broccoli without salt. And then I added a little bit at the table. So I was in control of the amount of salt that I was eating. But if it comes with cheese, you can ask for no cheese. It comes with bacon, ask for no bacon, even if it's something that's mixed in. If it's like a baked potato or a side, you can ask for no butter, no salt, and you can control it. If you're going to a fast food restaurant and you ask for unsalted fries, it forces them to give you fresh fries. You didn't hear that from me, but it is a little trick that I learned when I was, the drive-through girl a couple decades ago. All right, so we went through, for age 65 and above, we went through all of our food groups. We went through our tricks to figure out if a food is healthy. We learned how to read a food label. We talked about strategies for eating in a restaurant. My last little snippet for the day is let's talk about people that are in the advanced years. So for this last little snippet, I'm just going to focus shortly on someone that's aged like 85 and above, maybe even 80 and above. It just kind of depends on your independence and your level of function. Nutritionally, it's about the same as when you're 65 and above, but health status starts to change. So as someone's health declines and they become less independent and more frail, then their nutrient needs, although the amount of nutrients they need are the same, they're much less likely to be getting enough nutrients. So those barriers are more likely, the older we get, the more likely we are to have those barriers. We're more likely to have dental issues. We're more likely to have GI issues. And every time we see a barrier, we're just narrowing the types and variety of foods that we're able to eat. And the more you narrow it, the more likely you are to be not meeting your nutritional needs. Variety is the best way to get your nutritional needs in, because like we talked about before, this food might be missing this nutrient, this one's missing a different one. As long as you're keeping it fresh in different varieties, then you're probably getting enough. But at the end of the day, if we just keep narrowing the amount of foods we could chew, the amount of foods that upset our stomach, the amount of foods that I can cook myself, the amount of foods that I can store in my tiny refrigerator, then you're limited. The more limited you are, the more likely you are to have nutritional inadequacies. So I can't give very specific recommendations because it's all person specific. If someone has difficulty chewing, then I would recommend foods that are like naturally easy to chew, or preparations to make those food easier to chew. If someone has issues with purchasing or going to the grocery store, there's different options of having groceries delivered, or having a personal assistant or a family member help you with that. If someone has issues with preparation, there's a lot of convenience item foods. Just even in the produce, you can buy a lot of produce that's already cut up and ready to go, or steam in a bag. There's a lot of options. So I don't want to get into, we could like go down that rabbit hole for every different need, but just know that it's harder. The older we get, the harder it is to get our nutrients in. So it's all the important to it makes it all that more important to choose those nutrient dense foods. And something, maybe you have a mother or father or uncle that's still alive and they're in those advanced ages, or maybe you are. We find that when we put someone on a strict therapeutic diet for like heart disease, kidney disease, diabetes, the outcomes just aren't as good. Like the strict diets at that age just aren't generally recommended anymore. There are some exceptions to the rule, but when I was working in long-term care, especially once, if you're living somewhere where like the food, you don't have an endless variety of food at your beck and call, you have just the food that's at that facility. If we restricted it anymore because you've had high blood pressure for 30 years and it's well maintained with your medication, I don't need to be super on you about your sodium intake. I just want to make sure you're getting something to eat and you're happy and healthy. And frankly, if you make it to 85, eat your cake. I mean, like you've earned the right to that bacon and you've earned the right to that cake. All these healthy diets are meant to prevent a chronic illness, or prevent that chronic illness from debilitation and worsening your health. But by the time we're 85, what are we preventing? We've made it this far. Let's it's retirement. Let's eat those foods that we like. So I don't get too stressed about someone that's in this age group that they want to have cookies with their coffee every morning, or they have that routine of ice cream at the end of the day. I just want to make them happy, and I want to try to balance those foods with nutrient dense foods. Obviously you need your vitamins and minerals, but we might just need a multivitamin, and then you just do your own thing. We'll just you just make it person specific and try to just meet somebody where they are at that point in their life. I want to make sure I address that water question before I forget. So there was a question on how much water do you need? So like we talked about before, our sensation for thirst can kind of decline. So it's kind of hard to go by that. If you're thirsty, take a drink. The recommendations for how much water you need, if you don't have another disease that kind of inhibits how much water you should drink, because sometimes people have like heart failure and they got to limit their fluid intake. But let's just say you got nothing else going on, how much fluid you should need. It's 1 for calories. So let's scroll up a little bit. I don't want to make you dizzy. Did I make it? If you need about 2,000 calories in a day, then you need about 2,000 milliliters of water in a day. If you need 1,600 calories in a day, then you need about 1,600 milliliters of water in a day. Okay.
There was one more question.
Sure.
Is sparkling water as good as plain water?
It's fine, whatever you want. If it helps you stay hydrated, do it. Now there's some flavored sparkling water. The less in your water, the better. But if it helps you to stay hydrated by having just a little flavor in it and have it chilled a little bit, go for it. Sparkling water is okay. If you have heartburn, or if you have reflux or anything like that, the carbonation might not agree with you. But it's all about they used to use this word called a bland diet back in the day, and we don't use it anymore, but a bland diet literally is, if that food bothers you when you eat it, then don't eat it. I still go by that motto. So if the sparkling water causes you to burp too much, or it gives you a little bit of reflux or, heartburn, then maybe it's not something you should be doing all the time, but if it doesn't cause you any issues, that's okay. I like it. That's a good question. All right, so just to kind of wrap things up and give you a good take-home message, it's never too late to make healthy changes. I recognize that you guys have probably been eating in a certain way for 60+ years, and it's hard to make changes, and I don't expect you to make giant changes. But if we're just trying to make little things and be more healthy, keep it simple. Go with your food groups, watch out for your fat, salt, and sugar, and don't make it complicated. It does get harder as we get older, so the simpler the better, and make it personalized to where you are in your life and what your abilities are, and eat your cake, right? Eat your cake, eat a little bit of cake. Don't go crazy, but eat a little bit of cake.
We got all the questions too.
All right, you want to give it a minute to see if anybody else has a question?
Sure.
Okay. Just to kind of follow up, this is me, Stephanie Durbin, Master's of Science, registered dietitian, board certified in gerontological nutrition. I work at the hospital, so hopefully I will not be seeing you soon. But if there's any other questions, we'll just peek through to make sure we didn't miss anything.
What are the results of too much potassium?
Too much potassium. Oh, that's a good question. What happens if you had too much potassium? Well, if we had too much potassium in one serving, let's just say we took a potassium supplement, and can give you like heart palpitations. It can make you feel, make your heart races a little bit. But overall, I'm trying to think if there's an upper tolerable intake level of potassium. I might have to Google that one. I can't remember. I'm not sure that you can get too much if someone has kidney disease. Sometimes it's one of the nutrients they are very conscious of, because the kidneys can't filter the extra potassium that is in the blood when you, so when someone has kidney disease, sometimes they're recommended to limit the amount of potassium they eat. But otherwise, most adults over the age 65 aren't getting enough. So I wouldn't recommend just doing a potassium supplement. I wouldn't recommend doing any supplement without a doctor's advice, because some supplements can counteract medications. But typically, unless it's calcium and vitamin D, we don't recommend a lot of just one specific nutrient supplement. We would recommend a multivitamin instead. That way you're not risking getting too much.
Someone asked milliliters to ounces, so I looked it up.
Oh, cool. You did some conversions. My water bottle is like a liter water bottle, and it's about, I think it's about 4 cups. So if someone's getting 2,000, it's about 8 cups a day. All right, well, thanks everyone for listening. Thank you for inviting me. I think this is really nice. And if you guys have further questions, I think you know Mackenzie, she can bring them to me. All right, thanks so much.